Here we are at the course website. We're on the Navigable Lectures section, part 1, and we're going to jump right into doing lecture number 4. But before I do that, I'll just pop open to full screen here for us. And having finished with the Old Testament, we're going to jump to the Greeks, lecture 4. I note that this is Greek metaphysical thinking. Oops, hold on a second. I note that this is Greek metaphysical thinking, although we're going to start with Hesiod. And Hesiod is not quite metaphysical thinking, but he is important because he represents a certain Greek attitude toward the environment, or the history of the human relationship with the environment, I should say. He recounts 2 creation myths. Both of these tell the story that human beings once lived a perfect relationship with the planet, where they were harmoniously in relationship with the planet. The earth provided everything that they ever needed whenever they needed it. He should suggest that he calls it the golden age of mortal men. Human beings had all good things, for the fruitful earth unforced bare them fruit abundantly. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands, with many good things, and rich in flocks. Okay, so a number of things to notice here. First, a little aside almost, rich in flocks. Hesiod is imagining the original human experience as being pastoral. When he's looking back in time, he sees human beings literally being shepherds with sheep. We're going to see that again and again in this course as a way of imagining the perfect human relationship. We'll see it with Theocritus in The Birth of Pastoral Poetry, Virgil, and others. There is, of course, a similarity here with the Genesis account. We might think that, it's only the biblical Eden would suggest that human beings once had this perfect relationship with the planet. No, it comes in the Greco-Roman tradition as well. Hesiod clearly thinks that, there was a time when everything was fine, everything was great. But just as in the biblical account where we have the fall, there's sort of a fall into what he calls the Iron Age, and just like Adam receives from God a punishment that he must labor and toil on the earth, Hesiod imagines the same thing. So it's important to know you have this tradition coming at us from both the Greco-Roman side here as well as the Judeo-Christian. In that sense, it's almost impossible today, it seems to me, to not imagine in the popular imagination that maybe we did have a perfect relationship with the planet once. You hear people say this a lot. Perhaps it comes from this tradition. But also keep in mind that 2,700 years ago, when Hesiod is writing this, already people at that time, didn't think that they had it good at all, that really it was far, far in their distant past where human beings had this perfect relationship. So you'll hear people again and again trying to wonder exactly when things went wrong with the environment, when were things really good. They'll put it back 200, 400, 1,000 years or whatever. Well, clearly 2,700 years ago, people didn't think that they had that perfect relationship. To them, it had already been lost long ago. Yeah, so keep in mind a few things here. First, Hesiod calls these people the golden race, and he differentiates these different races. This will primarily be referred to subsequently, at least subsequent to Roman writers like Virgil and Ovid, as the Golden Age. Generally, you will hear it as the Golden Age. In that sense, that's a Roman phrase, but it's referring to the same Greco-Roman idea of a Golden Age, Golden Race. And it also, in Hesiod's account, he has this all happened because of a woman, Pandora, who has a shameless mind and a deceitful nature. She metaphorically stands for women. In fact, Hesiod gives another generic account of women, which is similar. Yeah, so In both of these accounts, the Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian accounts, you have the same thing. Not only do human beings destroy the perfect relationship they once had with the planet, but here again, it's women to do it. Pandora releases all evil into the world. Eve, in the biblical account, releases evil into the world. The suffering that we all have to do, here the hard toil and heavy sickness that comes with that, can all be traced back to a woman. So you can kind of see where this is going to set the stage for early environmental critics especially, and continuing today, becoming not only environmental critics, but feminist environmental critics, generically now known as ecofeminists, who draw attention to the misogynistic nature of so much of our tradition. Yeah, so people often ask me the question, when did things go wrong environmentally? And I sometimes answer with what I think is the best answer, which is not an answer at all, but a question, and that is, why in the world do you ever think that anything was ever right with the relationship that we had with the planet? The historical record doesn't really suggest that time ever existed. And really, common sense will tell you, do you imagine that when the first human beings made their way out of Africa and into an uncertain future, that they really had it so good back then? Why do we think this? In part, it seems to me that we've had this tradition, the Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian, dual traditions coming at us for nearly 3,000 years and repeatedly saying again and again that once we had this relationship that we now lost. Doesn't seem to me that it's likely we ever had that relationship. It was culturally constructed and reinforced thousands of times through thousands of works, whether it's literary works, visual works, art, music, all together, repeated. Medieval period, Renaissance, this is huge, and it continues today, that we once had this perfect relationship, which to me again seems doubtful, and likely culturally constructed. So that's he should. So now we're going to go to the big question, one of the big questions of the course: what is nature? In a very useful book called Keywords, Raymond Williams once said that nature is probably the most difficult word in the English language, at least one of the 2 or 3 most difficult, right up there with culture, for example. It is a very difficult word to understand what we mean by it. It's especially the case that not only is nature influenced by, etymologically, the word natura, which is the Latin word for nature, but also by the ancient Greek word phusis and the Old English word kinda. It comes from keen. So phusis, if you look at it here, if you change the U to a Y, you might get the idea that this became our word physical. It's all over the place in English. Metaphysical comes from adding this word to meta, and we're going to talk about that particular construction. Kinda may be a little less obvious, but it becomes our word after the great vowel change. You get rid of this vestigial E, you change the Y to an I, and you get the word kind. So when we talk about something's kind, what kind of animal is a dog? We're talking about the dog's essential nature. So they're related, these words. So you have these different traditions, the Greek tradition, the Latin tradition, the Old English tradition, all infusing our word nature with a vast range of meanings, literally dozens and dozens. Today, environmentally, we do often use the word nature synonymously with words like landscape and environment and wilderness. And sometimes we think that, nature is environments that are freest of human habitation, that's what real nature is. That's wilderness too. Yeah, and that's not the only way of thinking of this word. It is, however, one of the earliest ways of thinking of it. This dyad between nature and culture. We've seen it already with the Epic of Gilgamesh, the idea that, What's outside of the walls of rock is nature. What's inside is human culture. The two are sort of separated and apart. This will appear again and again in Western thinking, especially, as we'll see directly, metaphysical thinking. We tend to use the word nature today spatially. So what do you mean by that? What do we mean by that? And you say, like, I want to experience nature. I want to go out into nature. I enjoy nature. You're generally meaning that you're going to literally go to a place where nature is imagined as still residing. That can be something like Yosemite, a huge national park. It can be a small park in your town, a little towpath somewhere. But that's what we think of often when we think of nature as a place somewhere where nature is supposed to still reside. Now, think, of course, this is already buying into the nature-culture dyad. You are moving from culture, from a place of human habitation, to a place of less human habitation where nature is imagined as still existing. The park in your neighborhood, you may realize, is not actually nature, unmolested by human beings. It still is encroached on by humans who created it, but still it seems more natural than your house. And most natural places are like Yosemite. This is an interesting concept that we think of nature this way, and as you can get, I'm already suggesting here that this is coming out of this ancient tradition. But there are other traditions as well for the meaning of nature. The Greeks, for example, did not generally conceive of nature, their word again, physis, spatially. Rather, they understood it temporally. This is a provocative way of thinking about nature that exists today, but it's sort of been pushed over by this sort of spatial view of nature that is more common. So, in order to understand nature as a temporal rather than a spatial category, I thought we would talk about the film Rivers and Tides by Andy Goldsworthy. Excuse me. So we're trying to rethink what is originally meant by nature, and that will help us, I think, going back to the original Greek notion of nature to give us a better understanding of what we mean by it today. This is the reason that I had you view the film Rivers and Tides by Andy Goldsworthy. If you haven't viewed that film, you might want to stop now and go view it. This will be more understandable what's going to follow immediately if you've seen the film. Oops. Many of Goldsworthy's installations draw attention to the fact that nature is temporal, i.e. endlessly emerging, decaying, and in flux. Goldsworthy does not do this all the time, but it is a central part of his project to draw attention to nature as temporal and changing. So in the ice sculpture I just showed you, which is similar to the one that the installation that opens the film Rivers and Tides, you see that this sculpture is going to change. It's ice, sun hits it, it's going to melt. In so drawing attention to that, Goldsworthy is drawing attention to the fact that nature is always endlessly changing. If he didn't want to do that, he could have done what sculptors have been doing for thousands of years. He could have carved that serpentine shape in granite or marble and tried to make it last and endure. But he specifically chooses an incredibly temporal thing to draw attention to the fact, a fragile thing, that nature is always changing. Now, I want to just from the start draw attention to this fact, and that is that Goldsworthy often photographs his installation. I imagine he principally makes his living from that. And as an aside and as a plug, if you get a chance, go to the library or a bookstore or buy copies of Goldsworthy's books. They are very beautiful. If you like what you saw in the film, the the books are really very beautiful. But of course, when he does that, when he photographs the installations, if you photograph that serpentine ice sculpture, well then, you've made something that's going to endure. It might endure for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. He's been criticized for that because it sort of subverts the project. Well, I think we need to understand that that is the case. We also need to understand that Andy Goldsworthy needs to eat. So accept the fact that he does that, if you will, but still think of what he's basically trying to do here, which is not lock things in time with the photographs, but instead draw attention to the fact that things are ever shifting across time. So another way of thinking of this project is to think of it as emulating nature. So here you have a blossoming rose. Many of Goldsworthy's installations want to draw attention to this process. So think of a rose. A rose, emerges into being for just a moment. If you've ever bought roses or cut them, you have to get them at just the right moment when they're a bud. They're very beautiful at that point. In fact, some poets have argued they're even more beautiful at that point than any other. Because next what's going to happen is they're going to emerge into that beautiful blossom that we just saw, and that is already signaling the fact that they're going to decay. So a rose is caught up in that process, the emerging into being, the extraordinary beauty for the moment that it's here, and then falling away. That is life. That is nature. We're that too. We emerge into being. We enjoy our moment here, and then we fall away. Goldsworthy's ice sculpture, and this is the actual one that opens the film, is meant to do just that. It came into being and was caught in the process of being. And the fact, you remember, just this moment when he's finishing it, it's being backlit by the light, which you might recall from the film actually surprised him because it made it so striking, so beautiful. But again, remember, what makes it so beautiful, so striking, in this case is the sun on it, which is signaling the fact that it is going to melt directly. Goldsworthy again and again wants to do this. He wants to draw attention to the fact that nature is process, ever coming into and out of being. You might remember this from the film. Again, this is such a frail, fragile installation. It's not sunlight that's going to be a problem here, but in gravity and a little breeze blowing. So he makes these installations which whether it's an hour or a day or a week later, they're not going to be there. Just like the rose. Look at it while it's here, an hour or a day or a week later, it's going to be different. We didn't see this one, but this has to be one of the world's simplest and yet striking installations. Goldsworthy, of course, was lying down on gravel, looks like a riverbed, right before it started to rain a little, and he creates this image of himself. Looks very much like sort of a ancient French or Spanish cave painting, and of course that this happened for just this moment, and that will be gone very shortly, assuming it's still raining. You might remember this, where he crushes up stone to get their iron content, and then it sort of is meant to, in a very wonderful way, draw attention to a stream streaming down its bed. We're going to see this directly with Heraclitus. This is really capturing the exact sense of what Heraclitus means when he draws attention to streams streaming. Because he outlines it with this red coloring, it's exactly what Goldsworthy does. He draws attention to the stream streaming, the fact that the stream is not necessarily just this thing that you can go visit at a particular spot, because that's the stream bed. The stream itself is this thing that is always streaming away from us. I want to go on a little more with Andy Goldsworthy here. Even his installations that seem permanent lack permanence, and this is another great observation on Goldsworthy's part. You remember the stone wall. Stone walls, stone in general, since the Egyptians and before with Mesopotamians, has been thought of as being the solid thing that lasts. But Goldsworthy, aside from the fact that he has this sort of serpentine shape that he keeps like to return to, draws attention to the fact that this is going to crumble. Why do we know it's going to crumble? Because it's in part made of walls that farmers had put together 100 or 200 years ago that are now in the process of crumbling. It is, in that sense, like a reincarnation of those walls, and just as they crumbled, it will crumble too. From the very beginning, when the stones are placed there, those are previously crumbled stones, and this will crumble as well. You remember his stone cairns. This is not the one that was in the film, but the one he had sort of at the ocean's edge or water's edge, and the fact that it was, going to be. And he has it, and he visually represents this wonderfully, because as the tide comes in, it's sort of taken over by the water. It's there. When the tide goes out, maybe it will stay there, but how often will that happen? Eventually, it too will crumble, even though it's stone, and in this case, probably long before that serpentine stone wall. I should mention, although Goldsworthy is a real innovator here in these sorts of landscape installations to draw attention to impermanence, he's not the only person to do it. It's sort of a, at least for a while, was a thriving industry. This is Patrick Doherty, who we had at Santa Barbara at our botanical gardens a few years ago, who created Toad Hill, which was actually an installation created out of like willow vines. A building, you could walk in it and around it, and within a year or two it was crumbling, and it was left up to crumble. He has these installations all over the world as well, quite striking and quite beautiful in this case, which I think may be in Scotland, which as you know from the film is where Andy Goldsworthy is from. So Goldsworthy's installations offer a provocative question to our opening question, really the question of the day, and in some sense the course. What is nature? Nature is birth, growth, and passing away, the endless process whereby everything everywhere is ever coming into and out of being. Yes, nature can be thought of as a place like Yosemite that you can go visit, but nature can also be seen as this, as endless change, as the rose coming into and out of being, as the same with us, into and coming into and out of being, even stone walls coming into and out of being. It is what nature is. It is sort of this endless, relentless change. Goldsworthy's serpentine stone wall draws attention to this, the Acropolis, a culture that imagined that it could stand against time. It is not coincidental, I think, that the Greeks, who gave us this original sense of nature as change and flux, would have been frustrated with it, and we'll talk about why. It's a cornerstone of human cultures to be frustrated against this, but the goal that they could create something out of marble and granite that would endure for thousands and thousands of years, that would defiantly stand against nature as physis, as change, and would not be something caught up in becoming, but something that would be firm and endless being. This building was an attempt to do it. It failed. And we're going to see this predilection towards the enduring and the lasting on a metaphysical register with Plato directly. But yes, this is in part the Greek dream, which is to stand against physis, to defy physis and change. Now, I'd bring up Goldsworthy because this is very similar, the view of nature that I've just explained, that is written large in his films, to the idea of nature held by pre-Socratic Greek philosophers like Heraclitus, who imagined nature like a streaming stream. So let's go to our friend Heraclitus. Most famous for the phrase, you probably have heard it before, that it's impossible to step twice into the same stream. believed that all of nature, he believed that all of nature was this, an endlessly streaming stream, wildly in flux, as, according to what we just as we just defined nature, everything everywhere is constantly shifting across time, no sooner coming into being than out of being. The stream is a good example. Think of Goldsworthy's installation where he lets the red coloring, which you get from an iron-rich stone, stream down the stream. For that moment, you were acutely aware that when you watched it, that the stream was not that thing that you could come to every day and say, I'm going to go down by the stream and I'm going to sit at the stream. Yes, it is that, a stream bed. It is enduring in that sense, but it's also the water that is constantly streaming away. That's what we mean by the stream. It is the streaming. And Goldsworthy's installation, as you watch the reddened color going down the stream, it's drawing attention to the stream as streaming. That's the idea behind it. Heraclitus wants to do the same. He's saying that's what nature is. It is that streaming. It is that constant change. It is the rose coming into and out of being. That's what nature does. The Greek word phusis, as Heraclitus explained to us, means just this. It is nature, but nature as change. It is the rose that comes into existence for a moment, then passes away. Flowers across the planet are doing this all the time. So is everything, including human beings, coming into and out of being. So, to Heraclitus, as we've been suggesting by way of Andy Goldsworthy, nature can be understood not just spatially as a place you go visit, but temporally as well. Nature is change. This is the notion that when we want to talk about nature, maybe we should not be talking so much spatially about it. The stream that you go visit, the one that you can return to every day. But maybe one of the more important features of nature is that it is temporal, is that it is changing all the time. Goldsworthy's installations are an effort to reveal that. Yeah, so Plato, and when I say Plato, I also mean the thinking of Socrates as recorded by Plato, and hanging in the wings will be Plato's student Aristotle, who is going to be saying much the same thing. That what Plato will do is redefine phusis. Nature is no longer signaling the process where everything ever changes and passes away, but rather endures permanently. We'll get to Plato directly, but just as a little gateway into him, think of the Greek temple. The idea, not the Greek temple we saw that was crumbling, but when it was built, the notion that it could be perfectly enduring and stand against the ravages of time and nature. Plato wants to imagine true nature that way. But for him to do that, we need to make a huge epistemological shift. We need to start talking about metaphysics, metaphusis, meta-nature, directly, to get beyond nature, meta, beyond phusis. The metaphysical is an attempt to get beyond the physical, beyond nature. So Plato, I should mention here for a moment that there is a great temptation to put in the reader Plato himself, probably by way of the central books of the Republic, maybe the Theaetetus or the Parmenides, or something else. But Plato can be difficult, and it would have been hard to get at the key concepts when he was talking about so many other things. So we used Abernathy, could have used any number of people writing on Plato as a gateway into him. If you do get a chance, though, read the Central Books of the Republic. It's a fascinating work. Read the whole book if you have time. For a number of reasons it's fascinating, but especially regarding what we mean by nature and what Plato wants us to think of it as. Plato, of course, knew that the Greeks before him thought of nature as endless flux, as change, becoming. In fact, one of his teachers that he had great respect for was Credulus, and in turn Credulus had as his teacher Heraclitus. And Plato at times actually, and there's a very tantalizing quote in Aristotle, is not so adverse to Heraclitus as we might think. But, as you're going to see here directly, what is written in his dialogues is an astonishing rewrite of Heraclitus. Here's the difficulty. Socrates and Plato suggested that, if nature is endlessly and wildly in flux, if it's always changing, how can a culture even last across time if nature is constantly, threatening it, constantly changing and revising things? They argued that there must be something more than this. There must be some sort of permanent referent in the world for language, for example, to even work properly, or for us to be able to understand anything. So, they postulate it, and I do think that's an accurate way of putting it, because there's no way of proving this realm that they postulate, this metaphysical realm. All that we can know as human beings is through our senses, and the sense experience that we have confirms that everywhere everything is always changing, even stone buildings, even stone itself. This is especially apparent to us now in the 21st century, that we're aware of things like evolution and plate tectonics, where the continents are all moving, and the fact that we live in a universe that has changed a lot in the last 13.5 billion years before it came into existence. But Plato and Socrates said, but in our minds we can imagine something beyond change, a fixed and immutable realm where nothing ever changes. This is a realm that is metaphysis, that is beyond physis, it's beyond the physical. The metaphysical is a shift up and away from the physical and away from nature. We will see this again and again in Western thinking, in metaphysical theological thinking. Just to jump a little bit ahead to next class, think of a metaphysical realm in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Christian tradition especially, heaven. What is heaven? It is a realm that is not part of the physical. It is where things just are and they are enduring. It is a metaphysical realm. It is imagined, as Plato and Aristotle imagined the metaphysical realm. Heaven is frequently imagined as better than the here and now. Plato approaches this not from a theological perspective, and certainly not a Christian one anyhow, and suggests that, and this is a startling suggestion, that realm, this imagined realm of perfectness where nothing ever changes, where everything simply is, that, according to Plato, is the true realm of nature. That is truly nature. What is where we are now down here, though, in sense experience, the earth and the fields and flowers and us, we are not true nature. According to Plato, we are just an illusion. This whole world is an illusion. It is an illusory, false world. The real world is up there, this metaphysical realm that's somewhere that we can't get to. For example, beauty. Up there in the metaphysical realm, there's a perfect idea of beauty. Plato calls it an idea, his word eide in Greek. Down here, there are many beautiful things. You can see a beautiful tree, a beautiful person, but they are not really truly beautiful. They seem beautiful. They sort of reflect beautiful or partake in this great idea of beauty that's metaphysical. But at the end of the day, they are just a cheap copy of the real thing. Nothing down here is real. Nothing down here is the ultimate vision of it. That all exists in the metaphysical realm. Plato, in fact, even redefines the word physis at one point in the Credulus to be nature. If you ask him, what is physis? What is nature? Is it change and endless becoming? No, to Plato. Physis is that which is beyond all that. Martin Heidegger, of course, is a 20th century philosopher. He is aware that Fusus originally signaled endless change, and that other pre-Socratic, to Heraclitus and other pre-Socratic philosophers, and that Plato reversed, indeed even deconstructed this idea. In fact, Heidegger is largely responsible for making us aware of this fact. For a long time, we just sort of took Plato as his word, and we said, oh yes, that's really the true nature, is the metaphysical nature. And this wonderfully sort of dovetailed in the scholastic era of medieval thinking with Christian thinking, so that the metaphysical Christian view and the metaphysical Greek view came together and were sort of a match made in heaven, so to speak. Heraclitus is aware of this. I mean, Heidegger is aware of what Heraclitus originally said and how Plato and Socrates had reversed it. Heidegger thinks that this is an important turning point in Western thinking, what Plato does. He calls it a metaphysics of presence, in which constant presence, such as Plato's ideas, beauty being an example, are being privileged over the endless play of absence and presence that the Greek called phusis. So what we originally thought of as nature, change, things coming into being all the time, well, those things aren't present here long. They're present for a moment, then they're absent. And that absence and presence play, according to Heidegger, it's a pretty compelling argument. You know, we in the West weren't really happy with that at all. We wanted constant presence. We wanted the beauty of the rose not to fall away and be absent, but to be present forever. Since it couldn't exist here in this realm forever, Plato imagines a realm where that beauty always exists, and it exists even more perfectly than this realm. That's constant presence, the constant presence of beauty. And of course, to Plato, there are a range of things that are constantly present in that other realm of ideas. Justice would be one. Morality, according to Plato, has to be based on this. There has to be absolute justice, absolute standards. It's the only way that culture can work. We can't allow everything to just fall away and say that sometimes something is justice, sometimes it's unjust at another moment. That constantly shifting around is not going to be palatable to Plato. Heidegger, and this is why all this is important for us from an environmental point of view, surprisingly argued that modern technology is the completion of metaphysics. To do that, you've read Heidegger now, I hope, he takes up the example of a modern hydroelectric power plant being built in the Rhine River. So to understand this, and it's such a great example in terms of Heraclitus, we need to return to the idea of the streaming stream from Heraclitus. Heraclitus is stream. Oops. Recall from a few moments ago that Heraclitus says that the streaming stream is a perfect metaphor for phusis. Not this solid stream bed that's always there, but the stream that is constantly flowing away. What Andy Goldworthy wants to do when he puts a red liquid in, and sometimes he puts flowers in these installations and they just flow away. You never can step in the same river twice because it's already streamed away. Streams are additionally interesting to think about because in the bigger picture they are hard to get a hold of because they slip in and out of existence, not just in a moment as they stream by, but seasonally and over longer periods of time. Sometimes, like in a drought in the summer, the stream can cease to stream at all. It completely goes out of existence. You use Heidegger's phrase, it becomes absent. It is no longer a presence of all. Then other times, it's hardly even recognizable as a stream because it's a torrent. It's a flood that massively goes by. And that's present, the stream is present then, but it's an overwhelming presence. It's constantly caught between those. But think of this from a practical point of view, from human beings living near a stream. This is a difficult situation. It has been for as long as humans have been human. if you need to rely on that stream, the water of that stream, at times it may not exist at all, and you might die because of that if you're without water and there's just no way to drink or to water your crops. And at other times, if you live right by the stream's edge, which makes sense if you need to irrigate from it or to get water from it directly, when it becomes that torrent, it's a life-threatening danger. In that sense, Heraclitus's stream, as a metaphor for nature, reveals the problems that human beings have with this endless play of absence and presence. If you need the stream, you want it to be there, which sometimes it's not, and sometimes you don't want it to overwhelm you, which it does. You wish perfectly, I think Heidegger argues, that it would stop this endless play of absence and presence. It would just be present there in the amount that you needed it, when you needed it. Not too little, not too much, but just the right amount. Now, how do you get just the right amount? Heidegger gives the wonderful example of the hydroelectric power plant, the dam. So, hydroelectric power seems like a great idea, especially now that we're considering a range of renewables. But Heidegger argues that, this solves the problem that human beings have been faced with for thousands of years. The stream that sometimes streams too little, stops, sometimes streams too much. You convert the streaming stream into a reservoir. A reservoir becomes constantly present, and you can let it come out at just the right rate all the time. It's always there, on call, ready for use at any time. Heidegger likes to call it a constant presence. It is constantly present. It's a converting of nature as endlessly changing into a constant presence. So, Heidegger's clever imagining of this is that, remember, what Plato wanted was a realm, a metaphysical realm, beyond physis, beyond the endless play of nature, where we could have things, just exist the way they are, never change, always be there the same way. Well, Heidegger argues, this dam, this power plant, does just that. They've actually enacted and made real Plato's ancient dream of an entity free of the ravages of time. Yeah, we'll stand back and look at it in the big picture. Is it a metaphysical image? Really? No. Entity? No, of course not. Is it going to crumble just like the pyramids and the Greek Greek temple we saw? Yes, of course. But its goal, and it's doing this now, and every dam that, Hoover Dam, or the massive one which we're going to see in a week or so, that was actually recently built in China, they succeed at doing this. They actually make the endless, flow of the stream into something that is constantly present and there all the time for human beings. It's a metaphor for physis being converted into the metaphysical. And Heidegger would argue that this is just, this massive preference we have for this massive, endless desire that human beings have. And you could see this generally as controlling nature. But I've hesitated to use that phrase so far because it comes with so many other connotations that it's accumulated over the years, which we'll be talking about. But just think of it here as physis, the streaming stream, the endless change, being converted into something that is there all the time for human use. It's like if Andy Goldsworthy were to carve one of his sculptures, not out of ice, but marble or something. It's the desire to not do what Andy Goldsworthy relishes and delights in, which is, Goldsworthy celebrates change. He's saying, look, here it is, it's changing, look quickly because it'll be gone soon. But of course, we have had in the West a desire for constant presence for a long time. And it's arguably the case, Heidegger would argue, that in the last 200 years, and it's a very debatable time, we'll see, but it's Heidegger's argument, in the last 200 years, technologically, we've again and again brought things from the realm of nature into the metaphorical, metaphysical realm by making them constantly present. Yeah. So Heidegger argues this is one of the key features of technological modernity. Another example, fossil fuels. Okay, human beings have dealt with the sun for a long time. The sun's energy, in this sense, is like Heraclitus' stream. Sometimes it streams down in just the right amount, on a nice spring or fall day. It just heats your house enough so you don't have to use any other heat. Doesn't make it too hot, doesn't make it too cold. Perfect. The difficulty is, especially here, where I'm now speaking this from in the East Coast, at the East Coast, that you can have a week of overcast weather. It can be a winter day. You have a problem then, right? I mean, if you have no other heat, if you are actually relying on just solar energy, that would be absent then. It would be like the stream that dried up during a drought. Totally absent. You would be very cold. And for days on time, theoretically, if you were here at another time, another culture, you could freeze to death then. And other times, if you happen to have a lot of south-facing windows in your house during the summer, you know that you get an enormous amount of insulation, incoming solar radiation, and it can overpower the house. It can make it incredibly, incredibly hot. This is the difficulty. Solar energy, and one of the reasons it's been a challenge for us to use it effectively is because of this. Solar energy, the sun's light as it comes down from the sky, is a wonderful example of physis. And of course, the even more direct example is it shines during the day, it doesn't shine at night. There are a whole range of companies now attempting to build data farms, server farms that are partly solar powered, which is great, but of course it only works during the day, and people like to access their internet 24/7. So what do? You need to try to come up with a way of storing this energy. Solar homes, even passively heated solar homes, have to build in thermal mass to store it. But we have this great resource, I say great in parentheses, that we've been using for hundreds and hundreds of years. Fossil fuels were certainly big in Shakespeare's England and before, but and trees too do this. But if you think about it, a fossil fuel, a piece of coal, a gallon of oil, in some sense are like the dam reservoir, insofar as they can be stockpiled and held in reserve, ready to be deployed at any time to heat our houses. So fossil fuels, which of course come from plants that died millions of years ago, were fossilized and later we pulled them out of the ground to make them into usable fuel. Well, they're just a wonderful example of fossilized solar energy. In that sense, in Heidegger's sense, and again, they're not truly a metaphysical energy, metaphysical form, but they kind of are in the sense that they give us physis, the endless play of bright and dark days. All that's put to an end here. It's constantly present, and we've deployed a startling range of technologies that goes from the mines that dig this stuff up, to the power plants that burn it, to the power lines to bring it to our house, to our appliances that either create light or heat or whatever, at the click of a switch, so that we can do that. We can literally, and Heidegger actually talks about the fact that now we harass night into day, and what he meant is, well, maybe we should just accept the fact that it gets dark at night, but no, walk down your street with the street lights or into your house when you click the switch. We now don't want to have that play of absence and presence and have the light absent during the night. That's no longer good. We wanted to bring the light into the night. We also want to bring warmth into our house when it's cold, when the sun isn't shining there. Fossilized solar energy does just that. It no longer requires us to sit here in the throes of nature, changing between absence and presence, but it's always constantly present. We love fossil fuels. We rely on fossil fuels. We will wonder how we could do without them. But in the end of the day, it's a frustration with physis. I mean, you get everything, you get so much of what you get in the immediate sense of heat and light to see comes from the sun without any problem. It's been doing it for billions of years. It'll do it for billions more. But human beings, of course, we are unhappy with that. We want it to be constantly present all the time. It's a cornerstone of our culture. We'll talk about this more in future classes, but you can see this with so many things, and this is what Heidegger is encouraging us to do. Think of food, for example. We are unhappy with the ever-changing seasons and the food that it gives us just at that time. What does that mean? Well, traditionally we just had fruit when fruit was in season. You had strawberries a very short period of time in the year. Well, now you can go to a store and you can get strawberries all the time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because we've engineered them to be constantly present. People have rejected this, of course, in the slow food movement, and others are suggesting, well, you should probably just eat strawberries when they're in season. But no, as we'll talk about in this course, the average strawberry, the average piece of fruit, travels 1,500 miles to get here. It travels from temperate places like California, where they can be grown, 3 seasons throughout the year. Many pieces of fruit come all the way from South America, where it just so happens, given the way our planet fits into the solar system, where it's actually summer when it's winter here, so we can have fruit all the time. Heidegger would argue that, think about it, so much of the world, so much of what we've engineered in modernity is to have constant presence, to have everything just as we want it, when we want it, and not have to wait for nature to provide it very sporadically. Heidegger, always an interesting thinker, argues that at one point that this is sort of like a whirlwind taking place, the desire to engineer constant presence. And we human beings at one point got a little too close and were sucked in. And we talk about natural resources, so fossil fuels are a natural resource. They're a source originally, solar energy that now is come back to us again. We like to think of, or sometimes think of, for better or worse, I would argue worse, that all the earth is in some sense, resources for us to use. Heidegger would say, well, yeah, but we became standing reserve too. We became human resources, what he calls der Bestand in German, standing reserve. We're standing there in reserve. We're like, held aside, waiting to be used at just the right time. So, office workers are just put in a little cubicle for your 8 hours a day, so that you can be there on call at any time to receive a phone call, to answer, to write paperwork or whatever, that's what you're there for. So I don't know just how much that is true, but it is interesting to think about the similarities between human resources and natural resources, especially when called to be reserve. Hannah Arendt, I should mention, this is one of Martin Heidegger's students, and I guess a former lover, agreed with him in many respects, but realized that Heidegger was being pretty naive here, that this has happened for thousands of years, that it is not just something that emerges with technological modernity. It might be easy to see. Fossil fuels are a great example. For 400 years we've begun a huge reliance on them, especially with the growth of the so-called Industrial Revolution for the last couple hundred years, where they've become, an integral part of our lives. You can really see how important this drive has been for constant presence. You can see it even in renewable resources now, which are an effort to get beyond this. But again, with solar energy, the challenge is, how do we store this solar energy? With wind, how do we deal with the fact that wind only sporadically blows? I mean, one of the simplest answers now is that it will be used in conjunction with fossil fuels. shows that when you need the energy the most during the day, when people are in their offices and need it for air conditioning and all, solar is great in areas where it's plentiful, parts of California, Arizona, and the like. So, but it still has to be used with something else to give you that constantly present source, because we human beings are not happy without it. One wonders what it would be like if you did allow yourself to be in the throes of nature and accept it. Slow food movement is an argument for that, CSA boxes and the like, where you just get the food that is available all the time, excuse me, and you don't try to build your life around having a constant supply of whatever you want it. Maybe also we'd accept the fact that we couldn't have internet at night, or we had to not have light at night. Yeah, I know it sounds like a pretty strange idea, and that's Heidegger's argument, that we are unhappy with that. We want to have nature the way we want it, and we're unhappy with the way that it unfolds in its own accord. But Arendt argues this has always been going on, right? One of the things that's important to Gilgamesh, and you see this, and it's written between the lines, it's kind of a throwaway little line, but when Enkidu suddenly starts eating bread and becomes like the rest of human beings, bread, grain, is one of the great success stories of civilization. It is arguably what brought this civilization into being, insofar as thousands of years ago in the Mediterranean part of the world, human beings began growing plants and saving their seeds, grain. They built an economy, they built a culture around these seeds. Grain, of course, then can be made into a whole range of things, as those of us who like bread and pasta know. But the beauty of it is that it could be stockpiled, held in reserve for 2 or 3 years. And they did this in ancient Egypt. You have these huge basically silos where grain was stored under dry conditions, where it could be used whenever needed. Think about it. This is very different than slow food, when you eat your strawberries just a few weeks of the year where they happen, where they're ripe. The idea here is that we no longer have to worry about seasons and fruit coming when it's coming, because we can keep it and preserve it for years. And this is a huge innovation when it comes to something like famine. So if you have a very dry year and things are bad and you don't grow that much, because as a consequence, well, if you've stockpiled grain, and incidentally the United States, as our government does, stores incredible amounts of grain for just this reason, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about drought. You don't have to worry about famine in the same way. This is a remarkable innovation, and because it provides this constant supply of food, you don't have to be constantly out there gathering it all as well. You can literally bring the production into human culture, and you can have it as what Heidegger would think of as a constant presence. But again, as Arendt suggests, it predates technological modernity. It's here at the birth of culture with Gilgamesh. Arendt actually argues at one point that any culture deserving the name human, it has to involve constant presence in this. It's what it is to be human. Being human, a human being, is to stand defiantly against the ravages of time and of nature and of phusis, and defiantly make something that endures. It's a strong argument. We're going to take it up next class, where we begin looking at metaphysical and physical realm on a variety of different registers, and how human beings have been attempting to shift away from the physical, from phusis, from change in the original Greek sense, which Andy Goldsworthy nicely showed us, to the metaphysical. This happens most obviously, of course, in religion and philosophy, but as Heidegger and as amended by Arendt especially have suggested, it happens everywhere, all the time, as it's enacted technologically and culturally. So we'll look at this. Okay, so ends lecture number 4.